Hello, everyone. This is episode 42, yay number of Dresden Files podcast, member of the Broken Jars Network. We're going to go talking about Gaelic mythology once again. So we're going to start off with an apology of the previous time we talked about Gaelic mythology and how we butchered the pronunciations. We have since been corrected. We were saying Samhain the entire time, and it's pronounced Samhain, which I really should have remembered, because an M and an H together make a W sound. I don't know how or why, but okay. And also, let's see, it's looks like Fionn Mac Cumhale, and it's actually like Finn Mac Cool. And I'm sorry that I mispronounced it so badly. And this time we're trying better. I have like some guides of how to actually do it this time, and please don't kill us. Please keep listening.
McCool, am I the only one who just want to pull megaphons? Hey!
Yeah, as a description of why it's so hard for us to figure out, I'm just going to quote what someone said to us on the Dresden Files posting I did of the two different committees who developed the spoken and written versions of Gaelic not only never communicated during the process, but also had deep-seated anger issues with each other. From Blood-Guzzling Bunny.
Okay.
Like, wait, so that was the username. This isn't a Monty Python sketch, right?
That was the username.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if we're not in a Monty Python sketch, though. You could surprise me. All right, we're going to start off with kind of the big hitter idea or entity, which is the Fomor, as they're known as the Fomorians in Irish mythology. And Justin is the star of the show because he did like all of the work this time.
Well, not all of the work. I can Google foo like nobody's business.
I'm just like, Justin did work? What? Am I this slagger now?
Yes. I am also surprised. So, but yeah, I guess it does make you the slacker, right? But you're the pretty one, so that's why we've got you on the show.
I can't even like fan my hair or anything because I cut it up.
Right. Yeah, so the Fomorians are interesting because even in the mythology, they're always kind of a hodgepodge of creatures, and we're definitely going to see some of that, I think, in the Dresden Files. Like, tell me how the fish-faced people and the ice giants get together. Where does that make sense? And that's kind of the thing that he's pulling into the Dresden verse. And what's interesting about it is in mythology, I mean, they talk about them being a bunch of giants and old gods and things like that. And it even goes on to talk about them being like the personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought, so pretty much all the fun things. And so, with such apt descriptions and kind of the outsiders like we peg as being outside and that sort of thing, I'm kind of interested to see if they really are in league with, or they're an offshoot of, or what's the job there? Like, what's the connection? Because when we're doing some of the research, that's the main thing, is like trying to link the lore with the Dresden Files and see what Butcher's got in mind and kind of figure all that out. But the ice giants and the fish people thing is still one that it's like, hopefully in peace talks that comes up at some point, since we're going to actually see them. So
yeah, and I don't know what the wiki's source is. I'd love to know, but the Dresden Files wiki says that of the Fomor, some of their races are the Jotuns, the ice giants from Scandinavian mythology. And we only have one line from them, which was Vadarung, and changes. It's like, as soon as the Jotuns retreated, his children basically scattered. So now that they're coming back, we get to see Thor again, right?
Ish. So
again,
technically,
okay,
of things
again
that have been officially published, you're right, but it's very heavily implied, if not outright said, basically, that in the first chapter of Peace Talks, spoilers, for people who didn't back the Kickstarter, that they come across the tracks of one. So there's one physically in the flesh there in Chicago. For Peace
is it
Talks.
said ice giant, or is it just like giant?
I think they specifically said, Jotun, so like ice giant, right? Like that's you're the Viking, you tell me. So
Jotuns are ice giants, yeah. Well,
right.
Kinda. Yeah, sure. They're ice giants.
For simplicity's sake. pretty much, right? So, and I mean, if all you know about ice giants is because you watched the original Thor movie, you know, like the first Thor movie, then the same name, you know, everything like that. But so yeah, I think they're definitely a player. Like that's not just, you know, that wasn't just name dropping from Vatarung. And really, though, for his kids, I would like to say that we're going to see some in peace talks, but I really think he's holding that off for the, you know, book 18 for the, you know, wrestling book. So I really think that Thor is a masked wrestler.
We're really excited for that one.
Right.
And that's the common accepted theory, and that's great. It just like, is that also like coinciding with the fact that the Jotuns are part of the Fomor? And I had no idea of this until we were researching it. And I want to know where that was specified, because like that makes me think that the Fomor are connected with the whole Outer Gates Outsiders things, because they're the way that they're described in mythology is that they're always just those bad guys that come up and they have to be beaten back every now and then.
Right. So a couple of things, and I don't have a whole lot of sources, so you can take it with a grain of salt, but it feels like it might be pulled from like a Word of Jim somewhere, and that's what I'm going to try and find. So we've got some elder gruffs out there who can, you know, help us with that. But specifically, they talk about the Fomor in the Dresden Files are a collection of discarded races. And so it's been interesting to me that we mostly just see them as, you know, the servitors, which are more or less modified and presumably enthralled or otherwise manipulated humans or humanoids. And then you've got the actual Fomorian type of races. We associate them out of Bombshells and a few other places where, to me, they're like Sawagan from D&D, or they're Deep Ones from Cthulhu, if you want to take a deeper Cthulhu slant, you know, as we see that he's kind of doing that from Cold Case. You know, so, but with it being a like an amalgamation of discarded races, like you've got to take the stance. Do you really think that Thor and Odin and everybody wiped out all of the ice giants or drove them off? And then where did they go if they were driven off?
More like, you know, killed most of them, and then like there's like some left. Like the Fomorians is like a faction. They were a faction for themselves, and then it's kind of all these other dark entities that's kind of hodgepodged on to the Fomorians. That's how I see it, right? Like in Dresden.
Well, they are a hodgepodge of all sorts of things, as the way Leah describes it.
Yeah, but they were like
they're just a bunch of stuff that came together, and they're kind of all water related. Which ice giant kind of makes sense. Ice, water.
But I guess, I mean, I could be wrong, but I get the impression that the Fomorians was a faction, and they got like beaten down, and they were like broken, and then other broken faction.
They were
joined under
pushed
their
back
banner
before. Yeah. In Ghost Story, Bob talks about how like the Fomorians and the Tuatha that we will get to, I'm sorry, they're interrelated. So both of them are afraid of iron. And they had the Great She Wars that he described was oh so exciting, and then the Fomorians were driven back and away.
Right. Yeah, so I think you're right. So I don't see a source for it on Wikipedia, but this isn't even like the Dresden Wiki. This is like regular Wikipedia. But they say that the Fomor are water-dwelling cousins of the of the ice giants, basically. So yeah, I know that's out there. I just can't think of the source where it's said, and I think like it's Mab or somebody like that. Somebody explains to Dresden that the Fomor are kind of filling the gap, right? That the Red Court left, and describes them as like, you know, outcast races and that sort of thing. And so I think the Fomor, like they're their own thing. But due to some of the other stuff that I imagine we're going to talk to you through this episode, they got their asses kicked multiple times, not just by what end up being the she, basically. You know, since you've got the pronunciation guide, I'm going to let you do the hard words. But so basically, they fought multiple wars, got their asses kicked multiple times, and then were outcast. And so, you know, I think you're going to see a similar theme there with like the ice giants and other things, where it's like, you lost, the losers go under the sea, apparently, because we need a mermaid Dresden crossover now. So,
Right. There were 3 battles of what was the Great She Wars. I have no idea how to pronounce these ones because I forgot to look them up, and I'm not going to try. But there was 3 battles, and then the Tuatha She people won, and the Fomorians had to go away. And as to like why the Fomor were like the antithesis of the Tuatha, also like they're the evil ones. They're always talking about the harmful things, disease and blight and all of that. And the Tuatha are like usually the ones that are much nicer, talking about like sunlight or fire or a little bit nicer, crops.
Yeah, keep in mind the Winter Court people, they're the good guys, so like because there's a lot of that, like researching the Red Cap and Rawhead and things like that. I mean, some of this is loosely tied together, but these were more or less seen as the good guys in Irish mythology, which is ironic because they mostly are tricksters and murder you and leave changelings behind instead of your child and things like that. So how screwed up do the Fomor need to be that's the take on it? So and just to clarify, so the She technically were the third so they were the second and third war because they also dealt with the Firbolgs and there were some other groups and that sort of thing. And like the Fomor were mostly, as near as anyone can tell, were pretty much like the original denizens. So in a way, like they were the original creatures that were found there is the impression I got. So
yeah, they're always like suggested as being the older things, the things that were there before whatever is currently in power, whenever that is.
Really, you're going to use that though? Like you're going to call them the elder things because
I said older, not elder. There's slight difference there.
Very slight. So yeah, I see more and more of this tying together where it's like somebody had suggested. I think it was in the Reddit, I saw something where it was like, what if so-and-so and blah, blah, blah was just like cut off, like they were an outsider that was cut off. And I think that was one of the theories about Mac. Like one of the crazy theories was that maybe Mac, because he knows the outsiders, that he's not a fallen angel, he's a fallen outsider. And it's like more and more the Fomor kind of sound like that, where it's like maybe they were meant to be kicked out with all the other outsiders and got left behind for some reason, so... And maybe like if we want to take, so this is more crazy territory and I'm going to digress a little bit, but with the fact that the actual Fomorian types, the fish people guys, the frog faces, whatever you want to call them, versus the servitors, for example. So if you take the tact that they're potentially deep ones out of Cthulhu, those are some kind of fish-human hybrid. So maybe that's what the Fomorians are, is they are kind of the scions of the outsiders in a way, where they're like interbred in half. So that would tie the themes together very nicely. So
yeah, and we just have absolutely no proof. But for some reason, like basically there's on 2 fronts that there's these big bad guys that we have to deal with. That sounds a little suspicious. And as to why the Fomorians are like the evil people is basically that they were mean to the Tuatha Dé Danann. And when they were in power in Ireland, they were like demanding a bunch of tribute mostly being children every 7 years, specifically children of kings or just children. And we've seen that as being happening a lot.
Right? Well, is it
children
for what? In the lore?
No, I don't think so. Not in what I read, which was like the tale of the training of Cuhwale. I forgot how to pronounce it. But there's Fomors, and they're trying to take this princess because every 7 years they need the tribute. And you know what? He's just, I'm not going to let that happen, and he kills them. That's nice. But like, what was the first High King of Ireland was a guy named Bresh, spelled Bres, and he was a half-breed. His father was a Fomorian, and his mother was Tuatha. And so like, okay, we can like unite them all and everyone would stop fighting, right? But he was an asshole and a tyrant, and he was making the Tuatha be slaves and taking way too much tribute with either like gold and resources or maybe just children. And eventually, after 7 years of reign, he got ousted by, I would pronounce it as Nuada, but it's like Nuaha. Never pronounce a consonant inside the word, apparently.
7 years of reign. I mean, could you imagine? That would be like
ruling.
Living in England.
I mean, reigning isn't ruling, but
oh, rain! Shit, I thought it meant rain. And I was like, they were like cursed with rain. I was like, oh, that makes more sense.
So actually, that's an important thing to bring up, even though you didn't mean to, because one of the origin stories of the Fomor is that they were the first ones there after the biblical flood. So,
oh yeah,
so you probably didn't see that, but
I mean, I know my Fomorian lore,
right?
Yeah, but also one of the reasons that Bresh was taken down is that he was ignoring all of the rules of hospitality. He wasn't caring for any of his guests at the right time. They weren't getting drunk enough at his house, essentially. And so they just, no, you get down, Noaha gets up there, and there's much more fighting. And eventually they were killed. Actually, Bresh was killed by a guy named Lou when Lou made 300 wooden cows, filled them with poison or sewage or both. And because of hospitality, Bresh had to drink it. And Bresh did, and he died. It's a very type of comeuppance that he deserved.
I choose Plan B.
Didn't it taste bad?
Well, of course, but like he broke the rules of hospitality. Now he has to stick by it.
Right, and honestly, there were a couple of places I saw where it's like they use the laws of hospitality to like screw you some way, and I'm like, well, that seems to defeat the purpose somehow. Like I'm going to be a good guest, but I brought you poison.
Yeah, and then do you want to talk about Baelor? You seem to be really enjoying him.
Well, kind of, because I'm kind of hoping that it shows up somehow, but turns out Baelor's dead. But he was king of the Fomorians, so possibly associated with the god of drought and blight. Like some of the historians were saying that his story might have been directly like, we need a way to explain drought and blight, so we came up with this guy. He had a crazy powerful eye that was like, so he's basically like, so I've got Cyclops vibes twice because they don't mention if he had regular eyes or just this one crazy powerful eye, but I think he had regular eyes as well. But then he also, this powerful eye was like, Cyclops the X-Man shooting a crazy powerful death beam at things. And I say that because it's not like he torched one guy. It was like he destroyed the land with it. And so he ends up getting killed by his grandson in typical fashion. Like he sees a prophecy, so therefore he decides to make sure that he locks away his children and they can't have children. And wouldn't you know it, somebody breaks into the prison and gets it on with his daughter, and then his grandson comes and kills him.
That the guy went in and got it on with his daughter as revenge because he knew of the prophecy.
I gotta say that's one of the best reasons to have sex is revenge prophecy. Like, I mean, why not? So,
another thing that was interesting is that there were 3 children born. 2 of them were like either drowned or murdered, and if they were drowned, then they became the first seals. But the one that survived is a guy named Lou that I mentioned earlier.
Right. So, trying to trim some of the fat off of this. So he basically does a David and Goliath thing where he either uses a sling or a spear and gets him in the eye, and the dude has a meltdown because of his crazy eye, and he takes out the Fomorian armies, and then also potentially creates a lake. Let me just pull that name again. But go for it.
I think I'm going to butcher it. I'm so sorry. Loch Nashul?
Right.
It's a loch.
Right. I forget what it means. It's like Lake of the Eye or some nonsense like that, because, he had an eye. But, so one of the things that struck me and part of why I want to see this brought up in Dresden lore anyway is like to understand the eye, it's like it had 7 layers of protection to cover it because of how powerful it was. And it's like, as soon as you started lifting off like one by one layer, basically things got more and more intense. Like, it started to like blister the skin once you got the first layer off. And then by like the third one, plants start catching on fire and trees start smoking. And then by the time you got the last layer off, like the trees are on fire, the land is being scorched and craziness like that. So it was kind of
night to me.
Right. It was very, very striking description. So
these people have a thing for 7.
Well, 3 and 7 are magic numbers, right? So
yeah, I mean 3 shows up so often, but like it's a little bit harder to find things that are actually about 7 that aren't like Christianity, really. The carpenter children are 7 carpenter children.
I didn't realize.
Oh, he has 7
still
children?
counting.
Right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, unless I've forgotten one, but I've counted that multiple times. Like, yeah, there's 7. And if I'm wrong, someone's going to hold it over me for the rest of my life. Let's turn to what we call the good guys. Is it Tuatha Dé Danann? And they're usually the gods of growth and civilization. They dwell in something called like the other world, or basically it sounds like the Never Never in some fashion, or fairy, whatever. And they interact with humans, and they have a relationship with humans in various ways.
Right.
They generally have like a particular like feature of nature, kind of as the opposite of whatever the Fomor did as well.
Yeah, and one of their main things is that they showed up in Ireland basically from nowhere. So presumably from this other world, or maybe from ships, whether sky ships or regular boats. But that was one of the things that mythology was really wanted to make sure you understood, was that they just came out of nowhere and showed up one day. But kind of interesting for that. But keep in mind, these are the good guys. And skipping ahead just a little bit, one of the things that was interesting is that, so they eventually get beat out by these guys. Maybe there's a different pronunciation for this, but I'm going to do the Justin version. But the Milesians basically show up and eventually oust them. And they were the ones where it's like, cool, we're gonna have a peace. We're gonna split Ireland in half. We'll take the top half and you'll take the bottom half. And that's when they became the She, basically, and they became the mound dwellers, because that's basically what She translated roughly into from last episode. So pretty clever, like very folklore kind of ending, where it's like, oh, that makes sense, and somehow we twisted it. So
yeah, the Milesians is not an Irish pronunciation, but it's like a Latinization essentially of Gauls who came to Ireland from Spain, and it's like, okay, good enough. We're just going to call it them. And they drove the Tuatha Dé underground, which kind of leads to how their name changed, or at least it got combined with people called the Aoshi. It's spelled Aossi. And those are basically the fairies as we know them.
Right.
Like the Lannan She is explicitly an Aoshi. The same thing with Jenny Greenteeth.
Right.
Yeah. But it just so the Aoshi are also the Dwyn She. That one is harder to remember how to pronounce. It's just like there's all of this stuff of the various fairies that we're going to just call them fairies, and they all get combined at some point, but they do seem to have like factions within them, or they did at the very least. And now we have the winter and summer courts, but they're not all of what came out of Ireland or Britannia entirely.
Right, and that's some of the interesting stuff that we found out as well, where it's like there are all of these other organizations, but the way Butcher seems to handle them is that you're pretty much winter or your summer, but then we know that, somehow Kris Kringle and the Goblin King are somehow on the side, So
I wonder when we're going to see him again, the Goblin King. I mean, he's
next book.
2 books. He's coming next book. Oh, sweet.
I don't know. I'm saying everybody's next book, right? Like, we're all getting together to have tea and make sure we have this peace. So if he's a signatory of the Accords, then he's going to at least have somebody there. So.
Yeah, we're going to have to do an episode on, like, other mythologies, because he's not Gaelic enough for this one. So we'll get into that one eventually. I wanted to finish off the Tuatha Dé Danann is that they have like 4 treasures that are very particular. Like there's the Spear of Lu, the description is no battle was ever sustained against it or against the man who held it. The Stone of Fall, like it would cry out beneath the king who took the sovereignty of Ireland. It was supposedly located near the hill of Tara. And the
is Lu's
Sword of Light of
as well?
I don't know.
No.
The Sword of Light of Nuaha, no one ever escaped from it once it was drawn from its sheath, and no one could resist it. The sword is also described in the Tain legend as Nuaha's Kano, a glowing bright torch. I mispronounced that one, I know it. But my favorite one is, it's not Dagda, it's Dada. Don't pronounce a G. Dada's cauldron. And the simple description is, no company ever went away from it unsatisfied. Because this dude is Mac.
Well, that's your favorite crazy theory, so.
Yes, it just fits too damn well that I can't not believe it at this point.
Right.
So Mac is like a retired she-god?
Yeah, that's what I think. I think he's Dada, and then he just wanted to be a bartender when he decided to get out of fighting the Fomor or the Outsiders or both.
Well, and that's
why he's so
important.
friendly.
That's important to keep in mind too. Everybody likes the guy who brings the cake to a party. So he's not just a former she-god. He is the god of party. So I mean, really, he's the god of beer, but still.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, his name apparently means, or his title at some point means the good god, which is why everyone loves him so much. And he brings the beer. So he's like also the life of the party instead of just the alcohol provider.
Right.
Yeah, I can't not believe that this guy isn't Mac.
Right. Well, and I thought the artifacts were interesting because when I first saw them, it struck a resonance with the other 5 artifacts that we're still trying to figure out pieces. And I think these are definitely distinct things after going through them and looking at their lore and that sort of thing. But it's not like Butcher hasn't tried to combine things before that are otherwise disconnected. So that's why I was like, I'm going to include this in the notes because that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And it makes me, if we see so much of the fairies, are we going to see these Irish heroes come back? And are they going to have all of these really important artifacts that you cannot sustain a battle against the dude who wields a spear? And yeah, that'll be oh so important.
And there's a fair bit of this that I think will pay off in the BAT because that seems to be his, like, all of that's going to be answered by the BAT. We're going to find out about Leah. We're going to find out about Mac. We're going to find out about whatever. And,
Merlin.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this, I think a fair bit of the Irish lore, he's going to leave where it is, because like he appropriates pieces of it, but I doubt he's going to just show up and be like, okay, everybody, I got the artifacts. We're going to start handing them out. Everybody make sure you get an artifact, but because like, for example, crap, I can't remember the guy's name now, but former Winter Knights, like he's referenced them. Right. He's referenced them, but I don't think we're going to run into the guy, and if we do, maybe it's going to be some kind of spirit quest, I
don't know. He could be Mac, according to that crazy dude.
Right. I mean, it is one of the ones that bubbles to the top in my mind. So, I mean, I'm partial to the Irish beer god myself, but we'll find out. So,
and just, if Jim pulls, when he says like, we'll find out there, we'll find out later. If he pulls a Lost on us, I mean,
he knows how bad
I'm not a violent person, but.
So I've been telling people this since I read Deadbeat. We're going to find out towards the end of the series that he's been Lashiel's pawn the entire time. Because once you play with mind magic on that level, that you've opened up the floodgates, man. Anything is possible. And so when she started warping his reality, and I'm like, well, that's it. He's a goner.
But assuming that's not true.
That's not fun.
Dada is Mac. Yeah.
Right, for sure.
So another group of fairies that came from Britannia is the Tilwith Taig, and that's the pronunciation I'm going with. I have no idea if it's true, but that's what Marsters says, so good enough for me. And they're the Welsh versions of the Tuatha, except they're not the same people because they showed up in one of the short stories.
Yeah, well, I mean, so like all fairies, right? They're some kind of different thing, but they are fairies. And I'm trying to remember because apparently I'm the only guy who's read Curses, but it didn't leave too much of an imprint on like what they were. But they're some kind of they're a little people, So they're kind of like more like what you would think of as like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, I guess, is the closest analogy I can think of, where they're kind of like, they're tiny, they're kind of stout, they want to be respected and stuff like that. So some of those things come out. But in curses specifically, the king is the guy responsible for the Billy Goat curse, because they also shapeshift, and he was there watching the game as a Billy Goat, and somebody had the gall to complain about how stinky he was. So
I haven't read that short story in forever.
Yeah.
Can you go over what that Billy Goat curse is of Wrigley Field?
That's why the Chicago whatever have lost for so long.
Right.
Cubs. Except then they won the World Series last year.
Yeah. So
it was Dresden fixed it.
Except no. But that's kind of what's funny is like, that's, everybody in the subreddit blew up about that, and they were like, oh my God, he fixed the curse, except that the point of the story of curses and kind of the culmination at the end is that Dresden leaves the curse in place because he and the king decide that really the curse is better for the game, that more people the people who come to watch Cubs games do it because they enjoy the game, and they do it for camaraderie and other reasons than because the Cubs are winners. And as soon as they start winning, that's going to change it, and maybe they'll stop coming and things like that. And so at the end, there's this cute little moment where he and the king basically are watching the game and connecting like this, but he actually leaves the curse intact. And so if we want to take the win as canon as well, which I'm sure Butcher's not exactly going to revisit that, but if we were to come up with a headcanon reason for that, it's because the team is so good that they overcame a fairy curse, or maybe somebody else broke it, but Dresden left it intact. So
yeah, and the king, his name is I'm going with Marcer's pronunciation again, blame him, Gwyn ap Nud, which I know Gwyn I think means white, and that's it. That's all I know of Welsh, but I'm glad that they're not even harder to pronounce, because Welsh words are terrifying.
Welsh is a funny thing. We've got a D&D player who's from the area, and he started out naming his characters that way, and when nobody could pronounce it, he's like, that was a terrible idea. So he started going with much easier names.
And I just kind of assumed that if they were the counterpart of the Tuatha Dé Danann, then they'd be like the same people, or maybe it's a mantle. I don't know. It's just the fact that we kind of have evidence at the very least that they're different entities is kind of interesting, considering they're so heavily interrelated.
Right. I mean, I think the way that it's going to kind of shake out is that, you have the summer and the winter courts are obviously the powerhouses, but then they have their spheres of influence. And so even though there are wild fae out there, I mean, look at the influence on Toot, even, for example, where because Harry is aligned to winter and Toot is aligned to Harry, Toot is somewhat aligned to winter, even though he's still technically a wild fae. And so like you have this, you have this huge number of wild fae, possibly even outnumbering the winter or summer courts individually. And just, mostly they stick to themselves, and that's where the rest of it winds up. And so, you have some of the important players, you have some alignments like, the centaurs belong to summer court mostly. Ogres mostly belong to winter, or well, I guess ogres are summer, trolls are winter.
Yeah.
But you have some alignments like that based off of personalities and some other things.
Are they actually the same race, just differently aligned, or do they look different? Are they separate from each other? Ogre and troll. I think they look different and are like separate from each other.
Yeah, I think they are
separate.
Races. Yeah, there are some ways of handling it where they really are like just cousins and other similarities and that sort of thing, because they're all like they have the same sort of affinities in some ways, and they have the same kind of enemies at times and that sort of thing. So they're usually kind of interchangeable, or at least in the modern folklore that I'm familiar with. So
yeah.
Okay, so ogres are kind of French. They will be dealt with in another episode. Or at the very least, the word ogre comes from French, and therefore it's going to be there.
Sure. But it kind of makes sense we should talk about ogres. And trolls are more Norwegian, aren't they? So,
I mean,
yeah, both Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish. We all have like our local troll legends.
Right.
Yeah, I googled the word trolls, and all I find is a dumb movie. Unfortunate and unhelpful.
There's actually a city here about, how far away is it? Like 15 kilometers. That's called Sandby, which means sand town. And the reason it's called that is because there's an old legend that a giant troll was like walking with a sack full of sand for I don't know what reason, but he was doing that. And then as he dropped all the sand as he was going, because there was a hole in the back, that's why out of this town there's a lot of like hills. And they were made by this troll who dropped the sand, and that's why it's called Sand Town.
That's awesome. Really, that's similar to some of the legends we talked about last time with some of the she gods, and that there was a hag, basically, that she carried around boulders, and that's where their mountains came from. So it's interesting to see, be like, these stories are way too similar to not be somehow like either you guys had the same crazy idea, or maybe you were trading those stories, or whatever. So it's interesting.
It's really interesting when your country's more than 200 years old, huh? Lots of history.
Hey, the Native Americans have stories going back way beyond then. We'll get to that at some point.
Don't. You put them in reservations; they don't count.
The benefit is we get to steal
citizens.
everybody's story. So your story is our story, and their story is our story, and his story is our story, and hers, because why not? But
you're just a bunch of expats.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Well, and then the people that actually live in occupied America. So,
going back to the Dresden Files, it's an interesting thing to try to figure out whether a fairy-like creature is going to be part of Winter or Summer Court or Wild, because what we saw in Cold Case, I would have assumed that those would be wild Fae instead of actually connected to Winter, except for they are in a cold area. Maybe that's the connection, but I just have such an association with fairies in Ireland or Britannia in general being the whole fairy thing that fucking Anchorage is not connected. But okay, if a troll is Scandinavian, why is that in the Winter Court?
Because it's fucking cold here.
Do you want me to break your mind for just a moment?
Okay.
How did the Kenku fit in? Because we've actually...
They're Japanese, right?
Exactly.
Well, yes, but are they fairies?
That's the question.
Where
do they come from?
They're from the Never Never, but Never Never doesn't mean fairy.
Exactly.
Mostly true, but mostly what butts up against, the mortal realm, Earth, is fairy anyway. So, yeah, because theoretically everything shows up there, but it's like, see that we're getting to the square and rectangle argument again. So that's why I'm saying, because technically anything that we associate with fairies is Western culture, right? It's Western folklore and Western mythos. So when you start to talk about stuff on the East Coast, or not East Coast, but you get what I'm saying, on the Far East and things like that.
I don't. Oh, okay, I got it now.
So yeah, sorry, I had to, for the Europeans, the Far East, but so Japan and China and things like that, where do their creatures live or come from? Do they have something else that touches their area and it's not fairy, it's something else? Or are they some kind of Western centric folklore? Woo!
Yeah, so we know that the fairies are... Okay, hold on. Starting over. It's a fairy if it was called in the battle at the stone table in Summer Night. Whether or not they were part of the courts, they were wild fae, and they were called. And if they weren't, then they weren't fairies. That's what I'm going to say.
That's a pretty...
What if they were called
small...
and they were powerful enough to go, fuck you, bitch?
They could have, right. But if they were called, then they're fairies. But if they are not called, then they're not fairies.
So showing up is not the criteria. Being called was.
Yes.
Well,
we don't know because
that gets complicated though, because in Cold Days we see like the red cap, which we didn't see at the Battle of the Stone Table, and
Just
we
because
see
Harry didn't see it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. But if it was there, then it is absolutely a fairy.
Sure. So everything that was at the Battle of the Stone Table was for sure a fairy, but that doesn't
for Harry and his crowd.
Yeah, that doesn't give us a lot to build on, right? Because
like
also
if we had evidence that the Kenku were there, then yeah, okay, they're fairies. But if we just know that they showed up once and changes, and the reason they were there is that McCoy was calling in a favor and nothing to do with, say, Leah.
Which, no, I totally get. Like, I wouldn't say they're fairies either, but where do they live? Where did they come from?
The Never Never. The Never Never that's connected to Japan.
Right, which is different because
the
reasons.
Japanese Never Never. You know, you can get good imported goods from there.
Right. Well, and the Kenku are like their master forgers, so you know that's where all the fake IDs come from in Japan. Is the Kenku?
You want to talk about identities getting really confusing about where they are? Let's talk about the Morrigan.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because we wanted to look into the Morrigan specifically because we're thinking that she'd have a hint as to things about Mab or where Mab came from, and then we just find another confusing triple goddess that doesn't fully match up with what we have before. Like the triple goddesses that we have before, it was like the Hecate and the Maiden Mother Crone that we saw at Skin Game and the whole Hades vault, and we also have the three women that have the seeing eye of Greek mythology, another triple goddess sort of, and we have the Norns in Norse mythology that are the signs of fate, and Morrigan is kind of somewhere in between there. She is connected to fate, and sometimes she's a triple goddess, but not always. Sometimes she has a crow form, which is very connected to Odin and Valkyries and the whole chooser of the dead thing, but not always. And if the Morrigan is Mab or is connected to the fairies, then where does the lines parallel with, say, Norse and Greek mythology that we already have?
I only know the Morrigan really from Iron Druids.
Well, that's part of the thing, is that it's ambiguous enough. It's been appropriated numerous times in fantasy, and then even in legend and the historical sense, the folklore as well, because the Morrigan often gets confused with Morrigan Le Fay, even though there's a pretty strict distinction there. Like, you know, any attempts to link the two don't ever bear out, really. And so I think that's where we first were like, okay, we're going to have to come back and research this later. And then we didn't quite make it in for Gaelic episode 1, but that's kind of like where it's all at, is like, what, you know, like, because there are definite times where they refer to Morrigan as a singular person, as kind of like some kind of dark witch or goddess of some kind, where she just runs around making your life have a bad day. And then she's very definitely three, though. And so, like, maybe all three of them are Morrigan. And then, you know, so just sometimes you come across just one of the trio or something. But
yeah, I guess that's the difference between calling her Morrigan and calling them the Morrigan. And if it's them, then it's like Morrigan is one of them. And then there's Bibe, who usually takes the form of a crow, and Mocha, who's kind of associated with war and horses and severed heads. But there's also like another one that kind of jumps in at sometimes when they have to do the triple goddess thing. And Morrigan was also like the granddaughter of Nuaha, that was like the guy who took down Bresh earlier. So she's a person, she's a triple thing. I don't know.
Right.
She kills things.
Yeah, so it gets complicated. So let's see. So, I mean, no, I'm thinking different things. Never mind.
Okay. Just to be very clear, that I brought up the Norns also because it's a triple goddess that has to do with fate, but specifically because we know the Norns are the mothers as we know them, because Mother Winter is Skuld. And yeah.
Well, and see, that gets interesting too, because she mostly just says, you know, you weren't entirely stupid calling me by those names, but that's not necessarily the same as saying, you know. But it does kind of imply that she's gone by those names in the past, but she's Mother Winter now, you know. So, but yeah, it's weird because she goes by Atropos and Scold and, Mother Winter now, apparently. So,
yeah, and whether that was just her name in various times or all those people got amalgamated into one, we don't know yet. And also, they have this name out that he didn't choose that is apparently really important, apparently. And we don't know anything about that, but all of these entities are connected to Mab and Winter and Mother Winter.
Right. And the other thing that helps for the confusion too is thinking about them as two courts, because there's got to be a balance in summer. And so what are the summer fates called? Because we mostly know if the Norns and all of those are related to winter, but those are mostly all the fates that I'm familiar with. So was there a equal and opposite number and we just don't know what their name is, or are they something else?
Or are they shared? There could be a duality in them.
Sure. Yeah, so like they're all Norns, they just have more different names. So,
I mean, with the Norns, it's there's past, present, and future, and Skuld is the future. Which, if you think of it, like your past is your birth, present is obvious, and then your future is your death, and that's why Mother Winter is Skuld. So them combined is present would make sense, or at least that allows for a balance. Third would be Mother Summer. Sorry.
Maybe, yeah, but it doesn't feel right to me, So that's why I'm like, I feel like it's been mostly ignored, and part of that's probably just because he's aligned to Winter, and we don't see that much out of the summer courts that way. But
would be cool to see some maybe a side story with Elaine from when she was in the summer court. Get a picture of the inner workings of the summer court, like we've gotten of Winter,
right?
Somewhat anyway.
If we had a point of view story from Elaine, we would probably be learning way too much stuff that he doesn't want us to know yet.
Right. So
down the road, I was just.
So two people I could see fulfilling that would be Elaine and Fix, and I'd like to see it from either of their perspectives. Really, like him as the summer knight would be great. So.
Yeah, that would be cool, man. I wonder how Fix is. We haven't heard from him since.
Yeah.
So
is he mad at Harry? Shouldn't be. It wasn't really Harry's fault.
I imagine him doing the Winter Soldier thing, which is really funny considering he's the summer knight, but where he's just running around making people's lives hell and killing things because he's having a bad go of it.
He had a bad day. Da, da, da. Remember that song?
I guess I assume that he's going to be mad at Harry because, of course, he's going to be. But maybe he isn't, and he's more mad at Molly because she replaced whatever.
She didn't even. She took over as Winter. She didn't even replace.
Right.
She took Maeve's mantle, and maybe he think he can
Well, the summer mantle was already in where the winter mantle was gonna go. How is that Molly's fault?
Right. Well, and that's the other thing too is maybe Sarissa calms him down and explains look, Nemesis is to blame, and so.
Or he hates her worse than anyone. And Sarissa, I don't think she'd be doing a very good job at being the whole summer lady, considering she seemed to be trying to run away from everything. And we're just going to have to wait for more books to find out what's going on. And I know
that. Oh my God, can I just have a book?
It's going to happen in the next one where everything happens. Woo! This is why it hasn't come out yet, by the way, because that's probably the truth, where it's he's like, God damn it, how am I going to fit 95 different characters into this one book? So.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun to read. It's going to be so nice. Everyone's going to have tea and just sing Kumbaya and be very happy, right? With giant footprints on the beach, which I looked up the chapter of Peace Talks that we have, and it doesn't say anything about ice, just that it's a 3-foot long footprint.
Somewhere I get that idea. I will find something. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about asking when we were talking about that earlier. Was it ever mentioned those ice giants? Or just big feet?
Maybe, yeah. Well, and it makes sense why, Ramirez and Dresden not knowing it, but it might be the fact that because he previously linked the ice giants with the Fomor, and we know the Fomor are going to be in this one, I made that leap. So, but I will figure out where that came from.
Yeah. As a kind of maybe a final mention, we can talk about Jenny Greyteeth, and that she is a real person from mythology. Apparently, she's just this kind of boogeyman character that mothers would threaten their children with, of like, if you're not good, Jenny Green Teeth is going to get you, I think. Or at least she's compared to the Rusalka, in which the Slavic people did do that. But she would just kind of pull children and elderly people into the water and drown them. But if you look at her, she'll run away. Unless she looks back at you, in which case you die.
Rip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we've got to have reasons. She tries to impersonate your wife at your wedding and then tries to seal your fate with a kiss and runs off with your baby because reasons. So
yeah. Of course she's going to steal your baby. They all want to steal your baby.
I know.
Protect your babies.
Yeah. It's general fairy stuff versus, like Jenny Green Teeth as an entity. But yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but, I mean, she's explicitly described as grain-skinned with long hair and notable teeth, either that they're green or that they're sharp.
Or both.
But something menacing.
So she's the lawnmower woman. That's what it is. Like, she shows up and she just chews all the grass. Now I'm the only one who's read that one. Okay, so.
No idea what
from Rick and Morty.
Lawnmower Man. Yeah, so the Lawnmower Dog is a reference to the movie The Lawnmower Man, which is not at all really related to the Lawnmower Man Stephen King short that I was referencing.
That's the one that was. Is that the one that was made into a movie where he like gets smarter?
Right. Yeah.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Or like there's this guy with some computers or something, and he's like he somehow makes this retarded person smarter. Not
Which
just
I
don't know how you're supposed to say it.
Right. I
know James Bond plays the main guy.
It wasn't James Bond. It was the other guy.
It was Brosnan, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, he was James Bond at one point. So
he's James Bond for me. He's my generation James Bond.
Sort of.
I guess I'm thinking somebody else. Hold on. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think for this episode, unless you really want to mention something else, we can come to a close, and all of the stuff that we've looked up we can save for part 3, which is going to be so much fun. And we're going to do more mythology things of like the Germanic things are just miscellaneous. Like we don't have enough to do all of it about Japanese, so we'll just throw all of them in a hodgepodge. Keep listening if you want to hear all that crap.
But, yes, please promote our content as crap.
Yes, please do that. Dressed in crap. But we've got other content. A part of Broken Jars, I have high fantasy and writing, and I was actually productive in the past month, so I got to brag all about that. And we've got The Dangerous to Go Alone, and Jacob's doing Nerd Fit, which is not a podcast, but still check it out because it's nice. And I think that's it at the moment. But you can also go check out the old 42 episodes, which are still fun, and email us and all of that crap.
BrokenJars.xyz.
BrokenJars.xyz. Yep, that's got everything. So, bye, guys.
Bye.